Welcome to Threads of Truth, a podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today we explore a case that's both deeply human and endlessly puzzling. The man who called himself Lyle Stevik. Imagine this for a moment. A quiet, soft-spoken man checks into a pretty humble motel, way out in a remote corner of Washington State. He gives a name, but it's an alias, probably pulled straight from a novel. Then just a few days later, he's gone, vanished from the world. But here's the thing. He leaves no real identity behind. No family comes looking, no digital footprint, nothing. And it wasn't like a sudden disappearance. It feels like a deliberate, meticulously planned act of just erasing himself. So the central question, the one that's really haunted investigators and, captivated this whole online community of sleuths for nearly 17 years is this. Who was this man? Why did he choose to erase himself so completely? And maybe the most baffling part, why, for almost 2 decades, did nobody come looking for him? That name he used, Lyle Stevik. It's haunting, isn't it? And it immediately suggests something deliberate, maybe even literary, behind his final act.
And think about that timing. All this happened in this quiet, isolated town, Amanda Park, just days after 9/11, September 2001. The world was just gripped by chaos, fear, a really profound instability. And that context, as we'll see, it adds another really deep layer to an already complex and honestly heartbreaking mystery. So let's start this deep dive into the silent story of Lyle Stevik. Okay, so the story really kicks off on a Friday, September 14th, 2001. We're in the Pacific Northwest, specifically this really remote, almost secluded spot in Washington State, a tiny community called Amanda Park. It's right near Lake Quinault. Beautiful area, but also incredibly quiet, very solitary. And it was there at the Quinault Inn, pretty unassuming place, that a young man arrived. He looked young, maybe early 20s. Later, they found out he was actually 25. Motel staff, there's used to people coming and going quietly, but they noticed his demeanor. He was polite, soft-spoken, almost reserved, and he paid for that first night's stay with cash.
Right, which, isn't completely unheard of, but it's one of those first little details, isn't it? Part of this bigger puzzle. It hints, maybe, at a desire for anonymity right from the get-go.
And the name he gave? Lyle Stevik. Plus, a fake address from Meridian, Idaho.
Yeah, so right away you see this sort of careful construction of anonymity, this veneer.
What about his appearance? What did they piece together?
Well, from staff recollections and the later forensic work, he had dark hair, green or hazel eyes. And interestingly, several staff members mentioned they thought he had a slight Canadian accent. That detail popped up a lot in online discussions later.
Canadian accent.
Okay.
Anything else physical?
Yes. Investigators found an old appendectomy scar and clear signs he'd had orthodontic work done, braces at some point. Small things, but potentially, crucial for identification down the line.
But the really striking thing you said was what he didn't have.
Exactly. That's what really sets us apart. The complete lack of personal belongings. No luggage, no wallet, no ID, nothing. All he had with him, a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste.
Wow.
Yeah. And that doesn't really scream homelessness, does it? Or like someone who got robbed. It points, quite chillingly actually, to meticulous planning, to someone who very carefully stripped away everything that could possibly link him to a former life, deliberately becoming a blank slate.
And you can imagine, in a small town like Amanda Park, that kind of quiet, withdrawn presence, it would stand out. Even if he wasn't trying to, it made an impression.
It absolutely did. And it's crucial looking back at those first details to see that picture emerging. It's deliberate action, almost surgical, not just random chance. Every single piece, the cash, no ID, it all points towards intent.
So what happened after that first night?
Well, the next day, Saturday the 15th, he extended his stay, paid again with cash. He asked specifically for clean towels, mundane detail, right? But he politely refused maid service.
Okay. So keeping people out of the room.
Exactly. It wasn't just about, tidiness. It feels like another subtle but firm signal. He wanted privacy, wanted his space completely undisturbed. This carefulness, this almost, maybe obsessive attention to controlling his environment, his personal space. That seems to be a running theme in those last few days.
And people saw him around outside the motel.
There were reports, yeah. Locals saw him. One image that really sticks, I think, is these sightings of him pacing on the highway near the motel. You can almost picture it, can't you? Isolated in that huge, quiet landscape, maybe wrestling with things internally, just walking back and forth alone.
That's incredibly sad, just pacing.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the quiet desperation that must have been going on inside. And then there's that other detail, the really chilling one, about the room itself. What the maid found later, he'd apparently taken the pillows and meticulously lined the closet with them.
Line the closet.
While online communities later seized on that detail, they saw it as deeply significant. The interpretation, which seems pretty reasonable, was that it was an attempt to muffle sound, to stop sound escaping the room.
Oh, wow. Like he didn't want to disturb anyone.
That's the sense you get, even in that final desperate act, maybe trying not to cause distress to others. It hints at this, I don't know, quiet consideration, a gentle nature, perhaps, even then.
Yeah. That detail about the pillows really gets you. It adds this layer of quiet humanity to someone trying so hard to be anonymous.
And by Sunday, September 16th, the belief is that that's when he died by suicide, using his belt from the closet rod.
So the discovery came the next day.
Monday,
September 17th, the motel maid, doing her rounds, saw he hadn't checked out. Standard procedure, she used her key, went into the room, and that's when she found him.
And he left things behind, more clues.
Yes, more layers to his planning. There was a note found with $160 in cash. It just said, for the room. Very practical, almost impersonal.
To the room. Okay. But even more telling, maybe, was a scrap of paper found crumpled up in the trash bin. Just one word written on it. Suicide.
He practiced writing it.
That's what it suggests, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not a spontaneous act. Maybe he rehearsed it, thought it through. It reinforces that idea of planning, premeditation.
Any other money?
Just $8 found in his pocket. Another small detail, but it fits the picture. Someone managing every last aspect, right down to the final dollar. And this brings us, of course, to the name itself, that pseudonym.
Lyle Stevik. So they figured out pretty quickly it was fake.
Oh, yes, definitely fake. But where it came from was, well, remarkably specific and really quite poignant. It was traced back to a character in a novel, Joyce Carol Oates' 1987 book, You Must Remember This.
Wow. Not just a random name then.
Not at all. The character, Lyle Stevik, in the book. He's a troubled young boxer, gets involved in a very complicated, illicit relationship. The novel itself dives deep into themes of identity, emotional turmoil, self-destruction, this desperate search for belonging when you're full of inner conflict. It's a dark, complex story, characters grappling with tough choices, consequences.
So the fact that our John Doe chose this specific name, what does that suggest?
It suggests quite a bit, potentially. Maybe a certain level of education, familiarity with literature anyway. And maybe a profound, almost symbolic connection to the themes in that book. It implies he saw something of himself, perhaps, or his situation, reflected in that character's despair or maybe their struggle for control.
So it wasn't just a disguise, it was like a statement.
Exactly. A carefully chosen final statement. A sort of literary signature on his own death. And that detail, it immediately lifted the case, didn't it? Beyond just another unidentified person. It made it something more profound, more enigmatic, deeply human. It transformed his anonymity from just a lack of identity into a chosen identity. One steeped in this narrative of personal control, however tragic that control was. For many people following the case, that choice alone made him not just a mystery, but a person with a story, even if his real name was unknown.
Okay, so they have this incredibly powerful literary clue. They have the physical markers, the scar, the dental work. But the initial investigation still hit a dead end.
A complete dead end. Authorities did everything they could with the tools they had then, collected DNA samples, fingerprints, comprehensive dental records. They ran them through all the available federal databases, CODIS for DNA, FBI's fingerprint database, National Missing Persons reports, everywhere. Nothing. Zero hits. Absolutely nothing matched.
So for 17 years, just nothing.
17 agonizing years. He remained a John Doe, a total enigma.
It's chilling, isn't it? How complete that anonymity was, especially when you factor in the timing again.
Right. The post 9/11 context is huge here. You have to remember the atmosphere then. The entire country was reeling. Law enforcement resources weren't just stretched thin, their focus shifted dramatically. Suddenly, every anonymous person, every unexplained event was potentially viewed through a national security lens.
So a tragedy like this, a John Doe suicide in a remote motel,
Yeah.
it might just get lost in the shuffle.
It likely wouldn't have registered with the same urgency or received the same level of detailed scrutiny it might have otherwise, not amidst this frantic nationwide search for potential terror links. It sort of inadvertently provided this unique historical cloak for someone who was intent on disappearing anyway, making an already tough case almost impossible to solve with the traditional methods available at that time.
He just vanished into the chaos of a world suddenly looking elsewhere.
Precisely, consumed by a much larger global fear.
So you've got this incredibly deep mystery, born from quiet desperation, left unsolved for years. And then along comes the internet.
Yes, and this case really became a touchstone, didn't it, for what we now call online amateur detection or citizen sleuthing.
It wasn't just hidden away on obscure forums either. It really blew up on big platforms like Reddit, the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit especially, and web sleuths.
These are places where, true crime enthusiasts and these citizen detectives gather. And thousands upon thousands of posts were dedicated just to Lyle Stevik, dissecting every single available detail.
It's amazing, isn't it? These online communities, they're not professionals, but they bring this passion, this critical thinking, this collaborative effort.
It's the collective power of the internet focused on one goal. And their dedication to Lyle Stevik was really extraordinary. They didn't just sit around speculating wildly. They kept the case alive for almost 2 decades. They pooled resources, discussed every tiny detail, and crucially, they eventually helped fund the genetic testing that finally broke the case open.
What kind of details were they focusing on?
Everything, absolutely everything available. Facial reconstructions based on the post-mortem photos, the dental records, the handwriting on that suicide note analyzing its characteristics, even the choice of the motel itself. Why Amanda Park? Why that specific remote location?
And the Canadian accent.
Oh, yeah, that was huge. People trying to figure out geographical origins based on that. Cross-referencing details from the Joyce Carol Oates novel, it was incredibly in-depth.
A real grassroots effort, driven by curiosity, but also something else.
A profound sense of shared purpose, I think, to give this unknown man his name back, to solve the mystery, yes, but also maybe to restore some dignity.
So in the absence of facts, what kinds of stories did the community build around him? What were the main theories?
Well, with that void of information, narratives naturally started to form. One really common one early on was the running from something theory. It makes sense, right? The careful anonymity, fake name, fake address, no ID, it strongly suggested to people he was actively fleeing.
Fleeing what, though?
That was the question. Abuse, maybe. A strict religious community he couldn't face anymore. Or even, something criminal. Maybe he witnessed something, had to disappear, or was trying to escape a past life. These weren't just wild guesses. The lack of belongings, the cache, the alias. It all painted this picture of evasion. People online explored all those angles, sometimes coming up with really elaborate, specific scenarios. It showed how invested they were.
Any other major theories? You mentioned the 9/11 timing earlier.
Right. It's important to touch on that, but carefully. Given the timing, there was a very, very fringe theory. Was he somehow connected? Maybe someone involved who lost their nerve. But I have to stress, that was really minor speculation. It got dismissed pretty quickly by the more serious online investigators. It felt more like a reflection of the general anxiety of that specific moment in time, rather than a credible theory about Lyle himself.
Okay. What else were people thinking?
Another big one was the terminal illness theory. The idea here was maybe he'd received a terrible diagnosis, an incurable disease, and he chose to end his life this way to avoid burdening his family emotionally and financially with a long illness.
Was there any evidence for that?
There were some anecdotal reports that he might have lost weight before his death, but it's important the autopsy ultimately showed no signs of any underlying disease. Still, that theory resonated with a lot of people in the community. It offered a sort of selfless, tragic explanation for his actions, a compassionate motive.
But the most likely theory, even then, seemed to be mental health related.
Yes. Consistently, the mental health crisis theory felt the most plausible to many, long before he was identified. Utakes behavior, the pacing on the highway, for instance. Combine that with the meticulous planning of his death, the alias, the location, no belongings, even the pillows, and the complete break from his past life. It all strongly suggested a severe, perhaps long-standing mental health struggle.
And that gained more weight later, didn't it?
It did. When his family was finally found, they revealed they believed he'd been voluntarily estranged for years. That really lent significant weight to the idea of a protracted internal battle. It makes you think, doesn't it? About the hidden struggles people face and the silent ways they might try to cope or escape.
Were there other identity struggles considered?
There were, and it's worth noting how respectfully these were often discussed online. Some people wondered if maybe he was struggling with his identity in other ways, perhaps relating to sexuality or gender identity. Maybe he felt rejected by family or community, couldn't see a way forward. This line of thought really highlights the empathetic tone in many of these forums. People weren't just trying to crack a case, they were genuinely trying to understand potential human pain and motivation.
A desire for compassionate understanding.
Exactly. And ultimately, perhaps the most significant theory, the one that felt closest to the truth even before the ID, was that he chose anonymity. Purposefully. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was seen as this profound desire for privacy, for self-erasure, the careful setup, no ID, the alias. It all supported this idea of intent, to vanish completely, leave no trace.
A stark reminder of the length someone might go to control their own final narrative, to just cease to exist publicly. That desire for self-erasure, it's just so haunting. But what really strikes me about the online community's response, as you said, was the empathy. You see some true crime discussions online, and they can get pretty harsh, right? Speculative, sensationalist. But with Lyle Stevik, the tone felt different, largely respectful, treating him as a person first. A mystery second.
Absolutely. The collective effort felt less about just solving it and more about giving dignity back to someone who died alone and unknown.
And that detail about the pillows, arranging them to muffle sound.
That came up again and again. People saw it as this powerful example of his quiet consideration, a final act of gentleness, even in that deep despair. It really reinforced that sense of a soft-spoken, considerate nature.
It humanized him for thousands of people following this story, fostered this collective desire to understand, not just to solve.
Yeah, it made him real somehow.
And finally, after almost 17 years, a breakthrough. May 2018.
Science intervened, genetic genealogy, this truly revolutionary method that uses DNA analysis, not just to match suspects, but to build family trees and identify people through distant relatives.
Most people probably know it from cases like the Golden State Killer, right?
Exactly. That case and others like it really showed the world the incredible power of this technology for cracking cold cases. And it worked here too.
Who did the work?
It was the DNA Doe Project. They're a nonprofit dedicated specifically to identifying John and Jane Does using this technique.
So how does it actually work? It's not like the police DNA databases.
No, it's different. Traditional forensic DNA databases, like CODIS, compare a sample directly against known offenders or missing persons. Genetic genealogy is about finding relatives. Basically, researchers take the unknown DNA sample, Lyle Stevik's, in this case, and they upload its profile to public genealogy databases, places like GE Match. These databases are full of profiles from ordinary people who've done DNA tests for ancestry, that kind of thing, and chosen to share their data.
Okay.
By comparing the unknown DNA against millions of these public profiles, scientists can find matches, usually distant cousins, second, third, fourth cousins, even further out.
And then what? How do you get from a fourth cousin to an identity?
That's where the hard work comes in. They use those distant matches as starting points to build out massive family trees, working backwards through generations using traditional genealogy, birth records, marriage certificates, census data, obituaries, all that stuff. And then they work forwards again, trying to connect the different branches, methodically narrowing down the possibilities until they can pinpoint the likely individual. It's like assembling this incredibly complex jigsaw puzzle.
Wow. Painstaking work.
Incredibly painstaking, but also incredibly powerful. And in this case, it led to a match. Finally, after all those years, all that effort from law enforcement and the online community, the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office made the announcement. Lyle Stevik had been identified.
And they confirmed who he was, where he was from.
They did. He was confirmed to be from Alameda County, California. And he was indeed 25 years old when he died. It must have been such a moment of, well, relief mixed with sadness for everyone involved.
Absolutely. But then came another twist, didn't it? The family's decision.
Yes. And this is what makes the case so remarkable and also ethically quite challenging. What happened next? After he was identified, his family made a very conscious, very poignant choice. They asked that his real name not be released to the public.
Why? What did they say?
They revealed that all those years they had believed he was still alive. They thought he'd simply chosen to voluntarily estrange himself from them, cut contact.
Oh, wow. So they didn't even know he was missing, let alone deceased.
Apparently not in the way we might think of a typical missing person case. They believed he had chosen to leave. That decision by the family immediately shifted the whole narrative, didn't it? It brought up these really complex layers of privacy, personal autonomy, even in death.
And how did the internet community react? The people who had spent years trying to find his name.
Amazingly, and I think commendably, they largely respected the family's wishes. That intense public discussion about who he was, it mostly quieted down. It was replaced by this mix of, well, closure, knowing he had a name and a family, but also quiet tribute, and continued reflection on the implications.
It really forces you to ask some hard questions, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Did Lyle Stevik, whoever he really was, have a right to die as a John Doe? To achieve that self-erasure he seemed to seek? And conversely, did the community, having invested so much time, energy, even money, into solving the mystery, did they have a right to know his identity once it was found?
There's no easy answer to that.
None at all. It's where the human element bumps right up against these big philosophical questions about privacy, grief, the public's desire to know versus the individual's right to be forgotten or at least unnamed. This case really challenges our assumptions about anonymity and accountability, especially now in our hyper-connected world.
That tension is key, isn't it? The collective urge to know versus the deeply personal need for privacy. I think that's partly why this case resonated so deeply with so many people. There's that almost unbearable loneliness surrounding his final days. That image of him alone in the motel planning, it evokes such a tragic isolation. It makes you think about the silent struggles others might be facing. And then there's just that fundamental human curiosity, right? We want to understand identity, especially when someone works so hard to hide theirs. The act of erasure itself makes you want to fill in the blanks.
It's compelling.
And third, maybe the most modern angle, is this idea of erasing yourself completely in our digital age. His death was in 2001. That was before Facebook was everywhere, before smartphones tracked our every move, before constant digital footprints. His ability to vanish without that digital trace feels almost quaint now, almost impossible.
It really does. It highlights how much things have changed regarding identity and privacy. He's almost an artifact of a different era in that sense.
Last of his kind of thing. And finally, even though he was identified, the why remains a mystery, doesn't it? Because the family requested privacy, we don't know the whole story behind his struggles, his decision. And that lack of a neat final answer keeps the human element alive. It's why, even though it's technically solved, the story still captivates, still challenges us.
It's absolutely true. And the case really does stand as this landmark example, doesn't it, of how these online communities, when they're driven by empathy and purpose, and when they collaborate with new technologies like genetic genealogy, they can actually solve cases that stumped traditional methods for decades. It's a genuine success story for citizen sleuthing. It shows the power of collective intelligence and determination.
More than just solving a puzzle, though.
Oh, much more. It really became this moment of collective care, a testament to the compassionate side of online communities when they unite for a humane goal, focusing on the dignity of the person, not just the sensationalism. And it makes us reflect on privacy, dignity, closure, even when a mystery ends. The community mostly showed that respect. It reminds us that maybe not all information, even when uncovered, needs to be public domain, especially when it touches on such deep, private grief.
And just circling back one last time to that crucial context. Post 9/11, revisiting the timing again, that chaotic, fearful atmosphere right after the attacks. It's easier to understand how an event like this, a John Doe suicide in a remote place, might not have gotten the sustained focus it needed.
Right. With resources stretched and priorities elsewhere, focused on national security, anonymous individuals were viewed differently. Suspiciously, perhaps.
It created this backdrop that, tragically, probably helped him remain unidentified for so long. The world's turmoil provided this unintended cloak for his disappearance.
It adds another layer, doesn't it, to understanding the long, silent years of the Lyle Stevik mystery.
As we close this deep dive into the story of Lyle Stevik, we invite you, our listeners, to reflect on a provocative thought. Should every mystery be solved? Is there always a right to know? Or are some identities, some personal stories, perhaps meant to be respected in silence, even when the truth might technically be within reach? Thank you for listening to Threads of Truth. We really hope you'll follow or maybe review the show. It helps us keep exploring these fascinating stories. Next time on Threads of Truth, we examine another case of vanished identity, a man found unconscious behind a Burger King with absolutely no memory of who he was. He called himself Benjamin Kyle. But who was he, really?